Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition here of Point of View, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics over the next couple of hours. In just a few minutes, we're going to be spending some time talking with our friend Pastor Neil Tomba. You might remember the conversation we had with him a couple of years ago, but if not, I think you're going to enjoy the fact that he has a new book coming out. Let me just mention in the second hour, we will get into some other issues. Certainly, we'll be talking about what's going on in the Middle East. We also have some other information, for example, about some of the challenges that we're going to be facing in our culture due to, for example, the border crisis and the rest. And I thought just before the next hour is up, 60 Minutes did a piece on UFOs. What about that? And we'll get into some other topics as well. But Neil Tomba is the senior pastor for Northwest Bible Church. Been there for 20 years. He's been in studio with us before when he was talking about doing this bicycle trip from California all the way to Maryland. And he's, of course, done that. And it's an incredible story that's in this new book. I have an advanced copy, but it's coming out June 1st. And it's entitled The Listening Road, One Man's Ride Across America to Start Conversations About God. It's published by our good friends at Thomas Nelson. You can advance order it. We have some information about that on the website. We also have a link to his website. And if you go to our website today, we got a picture of him on a bicycle. So, Neil, welcome back to Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much, and what a privilege to get to be here today. And as you were saying that, I was just kind of remembering, I rode all the way across the country. I made it. And it is like, now I think about it, I think, did I really do that? Basically almost 100 miles a day.
Yes. For
33 days. We had 2 days rest, and our team, we all made it together. And it was an amazing, amazing time.
As I read through the book, I'm following you through the traffic in Los Angeles,
yes.
and trying to make your way to San Bernardino, and then you're on Route 66, and eventually, go all the way through Kentucky, and then you end up in Washington, D.C., and people are honking at you, and you're getting in trouble for taking pictures near the Pentagon,
yes.
and you finally get to Annapolis, and you are out of gas, literally. I mean, it's just an incredible story. But before we tell the story of 3,000 miles, 33 days, take us back, because when people ask you, how long did you prepare for this? Your answer is 18 years.
18 years. So, Kerby.
Take us back to 2001, I think, is that where it was, right?
In 2001, I was on one of my trips to Colorado where we would do a summer camp, and I was riding my bike in between camps by myself, coming down a mountain. I saw a little family. I thought, I want to have a conversation with them. And that particular day, I didn't have time, but I thought about all the conversations I would have with people just on mountains or riding bikes around White Rock Lake. And then I had the idea, someday I'd like to go across the country, see if I could convince Vila, my wife, to follow me in a car and just go and have conversations with people and record them and see what happens. And then our church a few years ago said, we want to work on having conversations.
Right.
Kerby, we did a survey of our church just to see what do we need to do better in our own following of Jesus. And it was like we had this big confession where we all said, we love Jesus, we want to hear his word, we want to obey his word, but we're missing something that was really big on Jesus's heart that we would go and tell others. And we said, we're not doing it. So we started talking about having conversations about Jesus. And it was really our church that helped me take the next step to make this 18-year dream a reality.
There's a couple themes that run through that, and one of course, having conversations about Jesus. There's a couple places in here where you talk about total dependency upon God, and that was not just when you're near Annapolis, but a number of other times that it surfaces there as well. And those are some themes, as a pastor, you've been talking about for really more than 2 decades.
That's
almost.
right. That's right. And the idea of total dependency, I love to talk about this. We say desperate dependence.
Yeah.
And when we first started talking about that at our church, Kerby, people were like, we're in Dallas. We know how to do what we have to do, and we can get it done.
Yeah.
And people were, I don't know that I like that. And here's what I would say. When I really am aware how desperately dependent I am on God, it doesn't always feel good.
Yes.
But Jesus said, if you don't abide in me, you can do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's desperate dependence, abiding in Jesus.
Well, and I think part of it is, too, let's just give your church credit. You have unbelievably gifted people in the congregation. And the sad reality is, because they're so gifted, they can kind of do it in the flesh and do really well. You know,
Yes.
I mean, it's not like they walk into the business world where they are today and say, boy, I am completely out of my comfort zone here. There is a sense in which you have to almost train people. And you learn that in seminary as well. There were some individuals that came into that first year class and they have had no background at all in Scripture, and they're just over their heads, and they have this complete desperate dependency upon the Lord.
Yeah.
Then you got some of these others, and they actually had Greek and Hebrew when they were as undergraduates, and they sort of think they got that, and that's part of the problem, because then they think they can always just do it in the flesh, and what we want to do is teach people to be dependent on the Lord and on the Holy Spirit.
Yes. And when we started this vision, I remember saying to our body, you know what? I know that this church, if we get behind this, we will work really hard. We will work till we are tired. But unless we come in desperate dependence, God is not going to do something beyond our own ability.
Yes. Well, again, the book is entitled The Listening Road, One Man's Ride Across America to Start Conversations. And just before we take a break, and then I want to talk about some of the conversations you had, just give us a sense of how this happened, because when I first heard you were going to do this, I just thought that maybe your wife Vila would say, well, goodbye, see you in Texas, see you in Annapolis. She was with you the entire way. You also have pictures that people can see on the website of individuals that rode with you every day.
Yes.
And this is quite a process to actually pull all this together, isn't it?
So for a year prior, we had a team of people. We met once a month to pray, and people said, I'll take care of logistics for vehicles. I'll take care of logistics for meals, maps. We had 10 people with us the whole time.
Right.
3 of us riding, some in a van with all our gear, and then my Nissan Pathfinder filled with camera equipment. We had a professional photographer, and he had an assistant. So we all rode together, 2 vehicles, 3 bikes from Santa Monica to Annapolis. And my dear wife likes to say, I rode across America going the speed of school zones.
Yes.
Try it sometime.
I just can't even imagine. So again, if you want to learn a little bit more about this, we have a place for you to go to the website, pointofview.net, or just click on the picture of Neil, because that will then take you to all the information about the Listening Road. You've got all sorts of pictures, got a couple of videos, got all sorts of other resources that I think would be helpful to you. But as we go through this, we're going to talk about how, even if you don't plan to ride all the way across the nation, or even across your own state on a bicycle, how you can initiate and actually use these conversations to talk about Jesus. So we're going to talk a fair amount about evangelism, talk about how to really approach those individuals, but at the same time, we're going to take you kind of along the listening road. It's kind of like Charles Kuralt. Remember that? Only you're on a bicycle here. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. Book's coming out in June 1st, and Neil's with us in studio, and we'll take a break and be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Is inflation on the horizon? The chairman of the Federal Reserve doesn't think so. He concluded that inflation is not a problem for this time as near as I can figure. Right now, M2 doesn't really have important implications. What he's talking about is the M2 money supply, which measures cash, checks, money market, and mutual funds. If you type the words M2 money stock on a computer, you will see 2 things. First, the amount of money printed shoots straight up in 2020. Second, you will notice the words discontinued. The Federal Reserve weekly chart is discontinued and only is updated monthly now. That should give you some idea of what may be coming. In a past commentary, I explained how the Consumer Price Index is not an accurate measure of inflation. Then I realized I wrote that commentary on May 12, 2011. Obviously, it's time for an update. I'll do that tomorrow. For now, let me state that the Consumer Price Index is based on a basket of goods which excludes many that affect you and your family. Look, for example, at the increase in home values in a few areas in the country. In the last year, the Zillow home value index for Austin increased 15%. Los Angeles increased 9%. Denver increased almost 8%. And Seattle increased 7%. Other prices have increased dramatically due to the disruption of the supply chain pandemic. Rising lumber prices will now increase the price of an average home by more than $35,000, according to the National Association of Home Builders. Economists may say that inflation's not a problem, but I think we can all see that prices are rising due to everything from monetary inflation to supply chain disruption. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pastor Neil Tomba with us in studio today, and if you'd like to watch, you are welcome to do so. Matter of fact, if you would like to pass this on to other individuals, maybe they're cyclists, maybe they're not believers, and they would certainly get a kick out of this, and this might be an opportunity to start a conversation. Let me encourage you, you can always go to the website, pointofview.net, download the listen button and get it in a podcast. But of course, since it's also in studio, you could also go to the YouTube channel, pass it on to others. And that brings me to something else. Neil, this is a 300-page book, 33 chapters, but I also know that you are bringing a camera crew, and pretty soon we'll be announcing to some people to be able to watch this. Tell us more.
Yes, we're working on an 8-part docuseries. We have half of it done, and now we're sorting through what platform we're going to put it on. And the guy who came with us, who was our main photographer, John Link, is putting this together, and he has done an amazing job.
So again, we're going to give you some of that information when that comes out. But again, if you're interested in the book, The Listening Road, 33 chapters, of course, 33 days, and 3,000 miles. So let's talk about that, because the first couple of days, you're just kind of just trying to get going. You're not necessarily looking for any kind of relationships to develop, but very quickly on, some of that began to open up almost spontaneously, didn't it?
Yes. One of the things that I kept in the forefront of my mind, Kerby, was I want to help the people in our body and people who would read this book to believe they could have conversations about Jesus, to believe they could start them, and to have a modeling that they could say, I think I could do this. So one thing, every conversation, I said to myself, I want to end this conversation in a way that I could have a second conversation. Because that's where most of the people in our church are at. They're working in places, they're going to parks where they might talk to somebody about Jesus, but they're going to see that person again, right? Yeah. And so I wanted to make sure that would happen.
And again, one of the things that I think is so helpful is you always struggle, I think, if you even want to have those conversations on how can I get from a discussion about, look at all the rain today or the weather or look at the snowmageddon that we all went through or something else, to Jesus. But in some respects, as people tell you their story, they oftentimes talk about some struggle, some issues, yes, some anxiety. And I think if you are really led by the Holy Spirit, that becomes a very natural platform to the gospel, doesn't it?
That's right. So here's one of the inroads that we found very often was as we were willing to listen to people's stories, they would start telling us some very painful, personal story. 3 or 4 times we talked to someone who said, I had a son die in a car wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And bam, we would have this incredible conversation. So one lady, she was working at a convenience store. And we go in there, and I start just having a chat with her. She comes out from behind the counter, and there was these 2 little stools there. She sits down, and we start talking. She tells me about, she's kind of far from God. And then she tells me in the middle of the night, her son died in a car wreck at 1 a.m. And I asked her, so how are you doing with Jesus? And she said, to be honest, I'm angry at him.
Yes.
And I said, that's okay. And then I told her the story in the Bible of when Jesus came to Lazarus' tomb. And I said, you know, there's a Greek word in there that it's a super strong word. And we usually think of it as Jesus was kind of sad, but it's actually Jesus was angry. And I said, you know what? Jesus was angry when a friend died.
Yes.
And Kerby, it was like the lights went on for her. And she just stopped and said, I never thought about that before. So there we had a great conversation about Jesus.
And again, it gets to chapter 11 in your book, The Art of Listening, because in some respects, let's be honest, oftentimes when people are listening, they're only half listening because they're thinking about what they're going to say next. But if you really master, and I think you've done such a good job and maybe can pass on some principles to us of the art of listening, many times when people are telling you their story, and almost everybody wants to tell you their story. That's a very easy thing to do. If you're there with the goal that I've just got to get to the gospel, you're never going to be quite effective. But if you say, look, I'm just here to listen, and I just want to hear what you have to say, there will be some great connection points. And a lot of times we just have to be willing to listen.
Yes. Kerby, even as you were saying that, I was like, oh, yeah, and I need to try to make sure I listen to Kerby here to answer what he is asking.
Yeah.
Even there's almost a discipline here that we have to work on.
For sure.
So one thing I would tell people, we are here to be curious, kind, and respectful about people's stories. So even I said, here's my intention, which helped hold me accountable. It was interesting how many times when I said, would you like to talk? People said, I don't have time.
Yes.
15 minutes into the conversation, they would turn to me and say, do you have time for one more story? And as soon as they were convinced we really wanted to hear their story,
right,
not simply tell them what we knew, they would start talking.
Isn't it? And that's a great principle because lots of times it's patience, right?
Yeah.
And tenacity and discernment and those kinds of things that we talk about so often here on the program. So those are some key aspects. When you interact with some of these individuals, some of them have some really tragic stories, like you said, those that have lost loved ones in one way or another. But some of the others just maybe have this sort of angst or anxiety about the future. I know one of the conversations you had with somebody said, boy, we have such a divided country right now. Remember that conversation?
Yeah.
And those can be opportunities too, can't they?
Yes. We climbed a mountain up to Oatman, California.
There you go. Yes. I remember that part.
And there's these burros everywhere just wandering. Apparently people left them years ago. And I got into a conversation with an atheist. And he was angry from the start. And I remember having this image of my mind of, okay, here's a guy kind of like a fish on a hook, and I really want to be gentle here, pulling it in, and not to ultimately get him to agree to Jesus, but just get him to have a conversation. And this happened to me 2 times with atheists. One, when I was just in a car to get to the airport, and then with him, the word respect came up. I don't feel like Christians respect me. And Kerby, really what was behind that is Christians want to tell me what they think, but they don't want to listen to what I think.
Back to listening.
So I listened to him, and I didn't understand half of what he said. It was just above my head, but I listened, and I would just ask some questions, and it actually got him just talking more. So another thing here was just the willingness to ask questions, even when I felt out of my league, attacked, or it just wasn't that friendly.
Mm-hmm. You know, Greg Kokel's been on the program with us before, and his book Tactics talks about the fact that sometimes even if you're out of your comfort zone, maybe they're a high-energy physicist, you're going, I don't even understand half the words here. Just by asking questions, you keep the conversation going.
Right.
And by showing eye contact and all the rest. And Neil, you can really, in a sense, warm that person back up to zero. And evangelism isn't always, if we want to use a football analogy, when you get into the end zone, because we do meet some people that are so ready, they're on the 5-yard line, and all you do is push them in there. But there are others, they're way back there. And if you can warm an atheist up to zero, I think that's a very significant accomplishment as well.
It's huge. And Kerby, again, the way even I got into this book and my thinking, most of us aren't even getting on the playing field.
Right.
So if I say to a person who's not even thinking about evangelism, and then I say, let's do evangelism, and they start thinking Billy Graham or some person that's gifted to do this. So I haven't even used that word with people.
Yes, I can see.
I just say, hey, can you start a conversation?
Start a conversation. And again, some of those conversations, obviously, as you say, lead to Jesus, and it's a part of what you're passing on here. So even as we make our way across the United States, we also learn some of these techniques. So I want to come back and take a couple more of those. One of those, you talk about gentleness and respect. You know, one of the things we talk about so often here is the idea of apologetics, because we want individuals to not only understand how to articulate a biblical worldview, but also to know how to defend a biblical worldview. But if you go back to 1 Peter 3:15, we should always be ready to make a defense, but we need to be able to do that with gentleness and respect. I want to pick up on some of those ideas that you have, but we need to take a break. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to ask Neil Tomba a question, well, guess what? We're going to let you do that. 1-800-351-1212 as we talk about his book, The Listening Road, One Man's Ride Across America to Start Conversations About God. Whether you will ever get on a bicycle and ride or not, there are some great, I think, vicarious lessons you can learn from him, and we're going to spend some time doing that. But if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Neil Tomba in the studio, and we're talking about his book, The Listening Road. And Neil, let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about what's on your website, because there's a section here on the docuseries. So we've already mentioned that that's coming in the future. Of course, the book, 300 pages, 33 different chapters, a section there on speaking engagements, and there is a link there where you have the video that actually links to what you did at Dallas Theological Seminary, which I really enjoyed. And we're going to get into some of that in just a minute. But if you'd like to have Neil come and speak, that would be an opportunity, and perhaps encourage other people in your congregation to actually engage in conversations with their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, maybe family members about Jesus. That's all available. And then just all the information about your cycling tour and all the other things that are going to come from this. This has been an event that has lasted for years in some respects, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. And we are hoping that it starts enough of a ball rolling that it will keep encouraging people to take the risk to have conversations about Jesus.
I just think it's so good. So again, we have that on our website, pointofview.net. You may just want to sit back and listen, but if you have a comment or a question about how to engage maybe a friend in a conversation or something like that, I would certainly give you that opportunity to join us, 1-800-351-1212. But Neil, before we went to the break, I mentioned just one of the chapters, and there are so many good chapters here, but this one about gentleness and respect gives us a chance to surface two stories. The first is one that I think would be very helpful because you were in, I think it was a campground here. You start the conversation and people start to back off. Now, sometimes they literally physically take a step back, but at the very least, they roll their eyes. And that's a point where you start saying, Neil, maybe I need to not be so seen as aggressive and just be a lot more willing to be gentle and reverent and respectful of those individuals.
That's right. If I'm listening to their body clues,
yes.
even.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw this one couple. We drove up to the top of a hill. They had a Sprinter van that they were living out of with two bikes. And we started talking, and he was super open. Right away, he tells us, we've both been married before. We got divorced, and now we're remarried, and this is how we're living our life now.
Mm-hmm.
And they seemed super open. We started talking. And Kerby, one of the things that I try to do is to connect with people where they are.
Right.
So instead of just saying, hey, have you heard about Jesus? To find a common ground.
Mm-hmm.
So they were talking about how they love the outdoors, and they had mentioned they had some religious background. So I said, isn't it amazing to think that God created all of this?
Yes.
And she caught me off guard. She kind of rolled her eyes and stepped back,
Mm-hmm.
even in the conversation. So instead of pushing forward, here's the image I had. If I went to somebody's house and knocked on the door and said, I want to talk to you about Jesus, and they started closing the door, I wouldn't push it open.
Yeah.
I would respect them. I would be gentle. And I chose to do that with her. And some friends of mine asked, hey, why didn't you challenge her? And I chose to step back. What's interesting about that story is that day I came in with a bloody elbow because I had fallen over that morning, and I was kind of tired and in a bad mood about that. And I had not taken care of it. In the beginning of the conversation, she said, hey, can I tape up your elbow? And I said, no. And I was kind of wanting to get to the conversation. And then as I'm slowing down, and then I watched her push back, at the end I said, I think I'd like you to tape up my elbow now. She got so excited, came out, man, treated me like I was her child or something. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that was probably the best thing that happened in that conversation.
Isn't that something?
For her to see she had something to offer me.
Yeah, and your vulnerability to be creative. Yeah, yes.
My vulnerability.
Because us
so
men,
often,
we just, we're fine, you know.
And so often we think we're coming there to give something, but a healthy relationship is mutual, right?
Yes.
And if man, I want to have a relationship to have a conversation.
Yes. By the way, getting bunged up, if you open the first chapter, you find out that just before you're about ready to make this 3,000-mile trip, you have a pretty horrendous crash, didn't you?
Yes. 2 weeks before, I really was in some of the best shape I've been in years.
Yes.
And I went on a group ride, was going about 30 miles an hour when my chain fell off my bike. I went down and I was just bloody. I did not sleep for about 7 days. I was in so much pain. My doctor toyed with the idea of sending me to a burn care unit because the wounds were so bad and so raw.
So anyway, you survived that. And then, of course, you've been telling me even since I asked you about Snowmageddon, you slipped on the snow, and you haven't run since.
That's right.
Since our Snowmageddon. But anyway, back to gentleness and respect. There's another story out of that, and it is really encouraging because I know we have a number of listeners that are Native American. And as you're riding through those areas, you're kind of an outsider. And so in some respects, that was another principle that you were able to apply, wasn't it?
So when we were in Native American land, I had not had a lot of opportunities to have heart-to-heart conversations with Native Americans. We had several of them, and it became clear to me I'm an outsider. And there were some walls and some real tentativeness. And part of that is they have a history, right, of how they were treated. And it was good for me to remember this thing that I've said many times because I heard a lady at our church say it. Everybody has a story. And to not just plow over that story. One of the guys that we got to talk to was Jeffrey. And one day we actually took a wrong turn, and I saw a guy down a long driveway working on a car. And there was a tree. It was a tree in the middle of nowhere. So we said, hey, that'd be a nice tree to get some shade and to eat a snack, drink some water. I went up to Jeffrey and I said, here's what we're doing. We're being curious, kind, and respectful about people's stories. Would you like to talk? He said, no, I don't have time. But you can use my shade tree. He offered it. So we're sitting over there, and I told Wes, who I rode with, he doesn't want to have a conversation, but I don't think this is over. And Jeffrey comes walking up to me and starts showing me his cell phone. And he had some pictures he wanted to show me about what used to be on that land because that land had been in his family, a hotel that had been there a couple generations ago, the rail line. And he starts telling me. And again, I'm letting him go at his pace.
Right.
He ends up talking for a long time, says, do you have time for one more story?
I love this story, yeah.
Then we had to go use the restroom.
Yeah.
And we're going into their house. Next thing you know, Jeffrey brings out a piece of handmade pottery and says, this is a present for you all.
Isn't that amazing?
And he said, because you listened to my story.
Isn't that great?
And we had a great conversation about Jesus. He went to a Baptist church, but also was trying to work in his Native American beliefs. And so I would ask him things like this. What do you think Jesus thinks about that?
Yeah.
Instead of me saying what I thought, I asked him, what do you think Jesus thinks about that?
It's just a great way to start a conversation. A couple other chapters. One of those, you talk about divine appointments. And it does seem to me that this is another place, Neil, where we just not only have to be good listeners, we have to be maybe in the spirit, because there are times when I look back, and I'll be vulnerable here, I've missed some divine appointments that God set up for me. And those sometimes are really blatant, where they just say, why are you doing what you're doing? Are you a pastor? I've always wanted to ask you a question. But most of them don't come with that kind of obvious reaction. There are times when sometimes it's so obvious, I say, Lord, you have to be so accurate to hit me over the head with them. But what about these divine appointments? Because you had quite a number of them.
I mentioned that for a year we were planning, and we would have group meetings Sunday night once a month, and we prayed, and that was one of the things we prayed for, divine appointments. I have a little journal I use.
Yes.
Every day I would pray for divine appointments. It was amazing how many times somebody said this felt like a divine appointment, somebody we were talking to. So we're on the road. We begin to talk to these two motorcyclists. One guy wasn't very interested at first to talk. And then he started opening up. His buddy said, I never knew any of this about him.
Isn't that amazing?
He had grown up in a family where his grandfather was the president of a Christian college. He went to that Christian college, and somewhere along the way, he had just closed the door.
Mm-hmm.
Well, finally, he starts opening up. He starts having tears in his eyes and says, I'm glad we talked to you guys today. This was a divine appointment.
Don't you love it? Don't you love it? It's just so good. Need to take one of those breaks, and when we come back, we'll talk about a couple of other issues real quickly. But one of the things, of course, that is one of the chapters later on is meeting people where they are. You've already sort of given some illustrations of that, but I think we pick out one or two more of those stories. Chock full of stories, especially over 3,000 miles in 33 days. You got a lot, and it's in the book, The Listening Road. It is published by Thomas Nelson, coming out the 1st of June, and it is one man's ride across America to start conversations about God. And, of course, we also have a link to Neil's website. We'll continue our conversation with him right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and then let me mention that we will get into all sorts of issues in the news next hour. So if you have some comments or questions, feel free to give us a call there as well. But Neil, I thought we might also look at one of the other chapters, and that is meet people where they are. You've sort of illustrated that already, but there is a sense when sometimes we come into a conversation, Neil, with our agenda. And instead, it should be Jesus' agenda. And we should be willing to put them first. That's a biblical principle, by the way. And there is a sense in which you, a couple of times, had an opportunity to just meet people where they are and be willing to have a conversation about something that you may not even been that much interested in, but that was their story and you were willing to listen.
Yes. Okay, Kirby, can I tell a story that just happened a couple weeks ago?
Sure.
Because it is so right on this. I'm at a restaurant.
Uh-huh.
There's this lady serving us with a great attitude. And I asked her, hey, how's this on the menu? And she said, it's not that good, don't get it. And I was taken off guard by it. And so I was thinking, just talk about meeting where they are. I always think, how can I take who they are and affirm how I see something about Jesus in them?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you have been serving me so good today. You've been showing us so much grace, and now you just spoke some truth about this menu. I said, did you know the Bible has these stories about Jesus? And in the stories about Jesus, it says he came in grace and truth.
Mm-hmm.
She was blown away. She said, I'm going to think about that all day. She goes in the back and she's doing stuff, comes back out and says, I've been telling everybody in the back there that you told me that Jesus came in grace and truth, and I reminded you of him. She obviously didn't know Jesus, but because I just was connecting with where she was and what she was doing that reminded me of Jesus, she's telling people about Jesus and she doesn't even know him.
I know. It's like the woman at the well, right? I mean, it's first come and see and now go and tell. And
Yes.
there was a sense, and I remember hearing you share that, I think, at the missions dinner that we had. But I mean, just a great story of how at a moment's notice, you can just turn something that maybe you had never thought about before in terms of grace and truth and speaking truth and love and meeting people where they are and really giving them that opportunity to understand that. Did you
Can
go
I
ahead?
tell you two more stories?
Please.
Just in the book? When we were in some smaller cities, a couple times we met these single women who had a child and maybe had a family member they were talking about, caring for. And this one lady, I remember talking to her. She was with her cousin and had her little boy there. And she was obviously caring for him. She talked about how he had lost his wife.
Wow.
And he starts tearing up.
Of course.
And so meeting people where they are, meeting her where she was that day, was really getting into her family. And then looking at her saying, you really care for people, don't you? And she said, yeah, family's important. And then I turned it and I said, what's your dream? And she started talking about, well, she had a dream of being a veterinarian, but she was putting it off because she was waiting to work in that town till her daughter got to college, taking care of this cousin. And that was just a great place of saying, hey, I'm going to listen to her story and see where that connects and where it leads us.
Yeah. You had another story as well that you wanted to share as well.
Well, it was another one very similar to that. And it's when we talked to you guys, we were in Bucksnort, Kentucky.
Yes.
So this was kind of a funny one, meeting people where they are. She started telling me about the Bucksnort Festival. Mm-hmm. This festival they had out in the country. And it was so just important. She wanted to tell about that. And you could see this smile come on her face. And really what she was connecting to was lots of memories, good memories around that. So we took time to listen and learn about the Bucksnort Festival.
Yeah, it's amazing. When you were in Kentucky, I think your colleague said, I guess we're kind of flatlanders because there were a couple times that these hills, because you think of the hills that you would have to go over if you went through the middle of the United States, so Sierra Nevada and Rocky Mountains. But if again, you're on 66, not so bad. But by the time you get over there into some of those mountains, pretty difficult. And that's why by the time you make your way to Washington, D.C. and Annapolis, there was just nothing left in the tank, was there?
I remember that last day. It was some of the toughest traffic we had to ride through to get through D.C., Virginia, and I cramped. And it was the first time during the trip that I cramped. And Wes, who rode with me, was pushing me from behind. And he said, maybe God's just reminding you who's God here.
Yeah. And if nothing else, dependency there.
Yes.
Didn't his hub break up or something like that?
Yes, and Wes had a little problem.
It's like everything that could go wrong in the last 100 miles went
That's
wrong,
right.
right?
Wes had a problem with his bike that he had been having. And I remember a couple times saying, hey, Wes, you might check your back wheel there. And he said, no, the wheel's fine, and worked on something else. And then finally it just totally locked up that day.
Yeah. And of course, you cramp up and everything less. And by the time you make it to the seashore there in Annapolis, I mean, you are completely spent.
Yes.
It was just unbelievable what you put yourself through. But if nothing else, just before we run out of time, some lessons you personally learned from this, because if nothing else, I know the lesson I would have learned is how important perseverance is in the midst of difficulties. What did you learn?
That's right. So in terms of having conversations, Kerby, I felt like it pushed me to a whole new level on this whole issue of listening.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing, I was amazed at how many times I personally wrestled with, I want to go farther in the conversation than people are ready.
Yeah.
I'm a preacher.
Yes.
I would have loved to
We're
have
at
some
the
things
altar
in the
call.
book to say, look at these people came to know Jesus. But it really was committing to saying, I want to have that second conversation.
So good.
And I really became aware of how often I say too much
Mm-hmm.
in an initial conversation. And I can remember even one of my bike buddies one time that we were friends, and I just pushed him too hard one day. And we had about a 3-month period, a cooling off period, and we're great friends again. But that thing sometimes, I think we think we're being more godly or standing up for Jesus by pushing the conversation. And there's a time for that. But if I know I'm going to get to see him again, I can give it space.
And again, using my football analogy, there's a lot of value in the 5-yard gain.
Yes.
And as you found out, sometimes just warming an atheist up to zero, there's certainly a gain for the kingdom, because eventually they're going to continue to move on that. So don't miss the opportunity to ask for them to commit their life to Jesus, but at the same time recognize the sensitivity we need to have when we have those conversations. But Neil, if nothing else, I'm hoping we've encouraged people, whether they ride a bike ever, to have those conversations, and I hope that you will spur on a movement of recognizing that let's just have some conversations about God, let's have some conversations about Jesus, and see where it goes.
Yes. Can I say one more thing, Kerby? You know, one of the things that happened during this trip is every day I was going out taking multiple risks.
Yes.
And sometimes we're just playing it too safe. And just to go out and say, I'm just going to try something. And it was so fascinating is coming back here, I was more willing to just take some risk with people I meet in a grocery store or wherever, because I was doing that on a regular basis.
So good. And we need to learn that from you as well. So thank you for sharing some of these lessons. I hope we can learn them vicariously. And let's have you back, especially once we have an opportunity for some people to see this documentary that's coming out. So looking forward to it. One last time, the book is The Listening Road, published by Thomas Nelson, coming out June 1st. One man's ride across America to start conversations about God. And Neil, it's always great to have you in studio. Let's do it again.
Thank you very much, Kerby. We'll be glad to.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some of the issues in the news. I've posted a lot of articles, and we're kind of work our way through that. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to make a comment or two, or I want to agree or disagree, well, that's why we call it Point of View. So we'll give you that opportunity. Let's take a break. We will carry on that conversation right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So we're going to get back into issues in the news. We're going to start off by talking about what's going on in the Middle East and Israel. And our first article here is a commentary by the former Vice President Mike Pence. So I want to read from that in just a minute. And then as a program note, let me just mention in about 15 minutes, we're going to be talking with our friend Gene Getz. Now, Gene Getz has been on the program with us many times before, is the senior pastor, the individual that brought about the Fellowship Bible Church movement. We probably have spent as much time talking about the fact that he's the creator of the Life Essentials Study Bible, which really was kind of a 7-year effort to actually provide a Bible that not only has the text, but then you can use the QR codes to then see all sorts of videos that teach on this. And it's been just phenomenal, not only to be used certainly around the world, because even if you're in a impoverished area, oftentimes those young people still have access to a cell phone, so they can use that to watch some of the videos. Of course, he is the host of the Renewal radio program, and of course established the Center for Church Renewal. But I thought we might bring him on for just a little bit, because he has been through a very serious bout of COVID-19. And so we're going to keep him on for just a few minutes, but it turns out that the Texas legislature is honoring him, and I thought it might just be encouraging to, first of all, honor him both on this program, but also to recognize some of the contributions he's made. So he'll be on with us just by phone for just a few minutes, and I'm hoping his voice will be good enough to carry on that conversation as well. Then we'll get back into some other issues in the news. We have a crisis at the border. Byron York has written about that. And I thought before the program is over today, I don't think we've ever really spent any time talking about UFOs. Well, 60 Minutes covered it on Sunday. Tucker Carlson covered it yesterday. Matt Walsh covered it as well. So it might be time for us to at least talk about that for a few minutes. And so we've posted, if you will, kind of a summary of what was on 60 Minutes, as well as a commentary that one of my colleagues did a while back based on the book Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. So those are some overview of what we'll cover this hour. And if we don't get to all of that, we'll try to cover it in the future. But let's, if we can, go to the first article. And I wanted to make it available to you because it isn't necessarily going to be given a lot of credence by the mainstream press. But Mike Pence, former vice president and former member of Congress and governor of Indiana and all the rest, calls it the issue of violence in Israel is the price of Biden's weakness. Now, again, he's got a political issue associated with this, but he points out, and I think accurately so, that the Trump-Pence administration, he says, opened the door to a future peace in the Middle East founded on our strong and unwavering commitment to the state of Israel. But now, of course, we can see that Israel is dealing with some of the worst outbreak of violence in the last 7 years. And if you listen to our Thursday program with Jim Dennison, when you look at that level of street violence, both by Jews and Arabs, maybe some of which is completely unprecedented. So Mike Pence goes on to say that many Americans witnessing the recent bloodshed in Israel are perplexed by how quickly violence erupted after years of calm. The answer is that President Biden and congressional Democrats have abandoned unambiguous support for our ally Israel, emboldened our enemies, and turned their back on the policy that yielded historic peace deals in the Middle East. He goes through and talks about some of the things that President President Biden and Vice President Pence did in terms of acknowledging Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Of course, we all know about the moving of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and establishing what most people have referred to as the Abraham Accords. And he then goes on to say every step of the way, Democrats and some of these foreign policy, quote, experts decided and derided the administration's approach and issued dire warnings that blood would soon flow in the streets of Israel. And as usual, they were wrong, because that did not happen with the Abraham Accords or moving the embassy, but it's happening now. And that is all some things that he's covered in the article, but then goes on to say that these groundbreaking peace accords happen not in spite of America's support for Israel, but because of that. And when you start realizing that other nations take their cue from the United States, we all of a sudden saw that there were various peace accords with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. I think there might have been, if there had been a second term for the Trump-Pence administration, maybe an actual peace accord with Saudi Arabia. But now that is very different because, as he points out, President Biden and others in his administration have been shunning Israel leaders. They've restored more than $200 million to the Palestinians that had been canceled by the Trump-Pence administration. They unilaterally took the Iranian-backed group off the list of designated terrorist organizations and announced its intention to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. And it is very clear to me that what was a time of relative peace in Israel is now been one that has changed dramatically. He goes on to say that every tepid statement uttered by the Biden-Harris administration is built on the false equivalency between Israel and Hamas. One is a sovereign nation with a legitimate government and a trusted ally. The other is an intentionally recognized terrorist organization that has fired now more than, the count is 3,000 rockets at Jewish families and businesses in the past week. There's no, he says, moral equivalency between Israel and the terrorist group Hamas. And President Biden and every American leadership uphold Israel's right to self-defense and condemn the terrorists of Hamas as well as their supporters and apologists in the strongest possible terms. That's just a brief summary of actually 4 pages of commentary by Mike Pence, but I thought I would also pick out real quickly something else. Rich Lowry points out the fact that you have some of the so-called squad, those 4 women that are part of the House of Representatives, who keep making the statement that Israel is an apartheid state. Rashida Tlaib, the Democratic congresswoman from Michigan, says Israel is promoting racism and dehumanization under an apartheid system. Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota refers to Israel's apartheid government. And one of the things we say here at Point of View is words have a significance. Words have meaning. And I thought it was interesting that even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when trying to argue that Israel is an apartheid state, actually nailed it, he said, by saying apartheid states aren't democracies. And that's the point. Israel is a democracy, that it affords, as Rich Lauer points out, Arab citizens full rights. They vote in elections. Arab parties sit in parliament. These parties obviously have a profound different worldview than the Zionist parties, which have been a barrier preventing cooperation between them. But even this year, in a first, Arab parties were part of the negotiations over forming new government before they broke down. You have Arab Israelis are full participants in the Israeli society. There are Arab justices on the Supreme Court. 20% of the doctors in Israel, about half of the pharmacists in Israel are Arab. Roughly 17% of the students seeking an undergraduate degree are Arab. And so this is anything other than an apartheid state. So if nothing else, you hear those phrases being used, tossed around, but they're not based on reality. We have a lot more to cover, but when we come back, we want to spend just a few minutes, if nothing else, honoring Gene Getz, who has certainly been associated with Point of View for decades. We'll come back and talk with him right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Is inflation on the horizon? The chairman of the Federal Reserve doesn't think so. He concluded that inflation is not a problem for this time as near as I can figure. Right now, M2 doesn't really have important implications. What he's talking about is the M2 money supply, which measures cash, checks, money market, and mutual funds. If you type the words M2 money stock on a computer, you will see two things. First, the amount of money printed shoots straight up in 2020. Second, you will notice the words discontinued. The Federal Reserve weekly chart is discontinued and only is updated monthly now. That should give you some idea of what may be coming. In a past commentary, I explained how the Consumer Price Index is not an accurate measure of inflation. Then I realized I wrote that commentary on May 12, 2011. Obviously, it's time for an update. I'll do that tomorrow. For now, let me state that the Consumer Price Index is based on a basket of goods which excludes many that affect you and your family. Look, for example, at the increase in home values in a few areas in the country. In the last year, the Zillow Home Value Index for Austin increased 15%, Los Angeles increased 9%, Denver increased almost 8%, and Seattle increased 7%. You know, other prices have increased dramatically due to the disruption of the supply chain during the pandemic. Rising lumber prices will now increase the price of an average home by more than $35,000, according to the National Association of Home Builders. Economists may say that inflation's not a problem, but I think we can all see that prices are rising due to everything from monetary inflation to supply chain disruption. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, if you've been listening to Point of View any length of time, you know that we've many times had a chance to talk with Dr. Gene Getz for a number of different reasons. First of all, he's been very much involved with what has been taking place here at Point of View for some time. He may be one of just a handful of people that have been in every one of the studios of Point of View. There are 4 major studios, one that was built by Marlon Maddox, and I think the first time I was a guest host on Point of View on one of those, I think in the first year, I interviewed Gene Getz. Then when we developed another studio that was available, and then we even used a specifically small studio for a short period of time, and then the one we're broadcasting now, certainly Gene Getz was there. As a matter of fact, many times when we would build a studio, one of the people we had pray for it was Dr. Gene Getz. So he's been involved with Point of View for some time. We're coming up on to our 50th anniversary of Point of View, which started when Marlon Maddox established it. And yet Gene Getz has been with us, I'd say, almost 40 of those years. And if nothing else, we know him as not only the individual who was one of the founding pastors of the Fellowship Bible Church movement, but of course his Renewal radio program, the Center for Church Renewal. And more recently, we spent some time talking about his Life Essentials Study Bible. So we thought we would bring him on, one, because he's been through just an incredible bout with COVID-19. And number two, the Texas legislature has decided that they would honor Dr. Gene Getz. So Gene Getz, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, thanks, Kerby. It's great to be with you. I apologize for my voice. It's not exactly what it has been. Hopefully it will be back, but it's a result of COVID.
Tell us, if you can, I don't want to strain your voice too much, what you've been through, because we have been aware of it. I don't know that I've said anything about it here on the radio, but how long have you been dealing with that, and what were some of the complications that actually have affected you in such a very significant way?
Well, it's interesting. I was speaking in Billings, actually in Montana at a camp, and spoke all week, spoke 10 times. Got on a plane, came back, went into my doctor's office because I didn't feel well. She took one look at me and she said, "Gene, get over to that corner as far as you can." And she went to her corner and she said, "You've got COVID." And to make a long story short, a couple of days later, I was in the hospital and I had an 8-month bout. I was in the hospital for 8 months and in care centers. And I got home, probably about a month ago. And boy, it's good to be home.
Yes.
But it's been a
what a roller coaster. Yes.
Yeah, it has. And I'm so thankful because I came very, very close to going home. I was 4 hours from the ventilator, and fortunately, some plasma had been donated. I was at Methodist, and they gave that to me, plus another deal. I've forgotten what you call it. But anyway, it turned me around, and by God's grace, I'm still here. And on the mend.
Just amazing. Let me, if I can, first of all, remind people that your Life Essentials Study Bible was really kind of a 7-year effort, and I've got one right here. And if you do a scan over the QR codes, not only do you have access to all the scriptural principles there, but access to all those videos. And you have not only been making this available, of course, to individuals all over the world. I've been so amazed that even when you go into poor countries, oftentimes they have access to a cell phone, which gives them an opportunity to watch those videos. But you've been distributing these Bibles to prison populations. And as I understand, I think you're giving them out now to the Texas legislature.
Well, yeah, that was an interesting, surprising event that Phil King, I believe he's in 61st District. He's west of Fort Worth, but his wife got him a Bible. She heard me speak in her church, and so we made the Bible available. And by the way, that's when we sell them. For every one we sell, our goal is to give one away to those who can't afford it. But anyway, she gave one to him, and he called me and said, "Gene, this is incredible." And he was watching the videos every day and reading the scripture. And so he invited me to come to Austin for the House of Representatives. That actually happened today, Kerby. This morning, 150 Bibles were presented to the 150 representatives. And then they made a statement, a resolution, honoring me for my ministry in church planting and teaching, but especially the multimedia Life Essentials Study Bible. And I was able to watch it online. They wanted me to come, but my family had I'd say a minor intervention and convinced me it was too risky.
Yes, wondering
to go there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me first of all mention to some that people, if they are interested in the Life Essentials Bible, we do have that on our website today, pointofview.net, and that is an opportunity for you to get a Bible very similar to the ones that were given out today to the 150 members of the Texas House of Representatives. If you click on the website link, it also has some of the Life Essentials video And there's even a place where there's one video that helps you explain to anybody what they are, because again, as you have always been, you and your friend David and others have always been kind of on the cutting edge. You were one of the first radio programs I know to use digital editing, now using these QR codes to actually provide material through the Life Essentials Bible. And must admit, for a guy with gray hair, you certainly have a real cutting edge kind of idea about how to use the latest technology to advance the kingdom. So just before we go, talk about how other people can use this Life Essentials Bible, because I think it's a great resource and I found it very useful, and I want to encourage people to get a copy and to begin to study God's Word in much greater depth because of what you've provided.
Well, there are lots of creative ways, Kerby, but in personal study, I find the feedback we're getting just regularly is that people are understanding the Word in a way they never understood it before and applying it, understanding how the Old and New Testament flow together, one redemptive story from Genesis to Revelation. Works well for discipling, works well for evangelism. Phil King, by the way, the House of Representatives that invited me to Austin and orchestrated this event today with several others. Basically, he meets with businessmen and he gives them a copy of the Bible and gets them into the Word in a way that they've not been in the Word before. And with some unbelievers who would like to know more about the Bible but just don't know where to begin. Small groups, you can just project it on your big screen TV in the living room and watch the video. They run from 5 to 15 minutes. And then I end with a question for reflection and response. And I illustrate some answers to that, and then you just open it up for discussion. And so, it works really well for pastors. It's a great way just to get creative ideas for principles to live by, and they can build their messages from there. By the way, overseas, we're just getting ready now to ship 2,000 Bibles. These are all gifts to Uganda. We've just completed a Life Essentials Training Center in Uganda, and pastors can come in for a week. We can house 25 pastors for a week, have motel units, and they've never had any formal training. If they had, it's minimal. And so that's just an illustration of the kind of thing that we're doing.
Very good. Well, again, we've had Gene Getz with us, and again, the Texas legislature honored him today, and we wanted to honor him as well. I want to thank Phil King, 61st District. He's been on the program with us as well. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to contact Gene Getz, I'd like to know more about the Bible, we have all of that at our website, pointofview.net. And so, Dr. Gene Getz, congratulations. Thanks for being with us, and we will be back right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You've been listening to me. I'd love to listen to you. If you've got some comments or questions, want to get into a couple of other topics that may be of relevance to you. But also as a program note, let me just mention tomorrow I will be traveling. So Dr. Merrill Matthews will be in studio. And the reason for that is we'll be doing live broadcast, first of all, from WAGP on Thursday. Looking forward to seeing some of you in South Carolina, and that is going to be a great opportunity. And then on Friday, we'll be in Augusta, Georgia, and we'll be broadcasting through the Good News Network. So I just wanted you to know that I will be traveling, and I more and more would like to try, since we are now kind of getting past some of the COVID-19 get out, and to meet you face to face. So had a chance to see some of you in Alaska. Looking forward to a future trip in California. But later this week, South Carolina and Georgia. And if you would like to come out to the station or some of the events we've invited some of you to, we would encourage you to do so, and look forward to meeting you. If nothing else, I will continue covering all these stories that you need to know about every single day. My commentary today is called Little Inflation ? Now, the reason I asked that in a question mark way is you've had everybody from President Joe Biden to the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, kind of say, I don't think inflation's that big a deal. Partially, they said this before it was released and revealed that they are now putting it at about 4%. And that relates very much to my commentary, which will be out tomorrow, called the Consumer Price Index, in which I have many times in the past, but I realize it's been a while, have talked about how the Consumer Price Index is really not an accurate measure of inflation. But probably the most telling part of this commentary is simply the fact that the comment by the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and again is Jerome Powell, said that inflation is not a problem for this time. As near as I can figure right now, M2 doesn't really have important implications. And more, I feel the need to educate you a little bit about economics. Not that we want to get into all the details, but M2 has to do with what's called the money supply. And that is something that is used by the Federal Reserve to measure cash, checks, money market, mutual funds, those kinds of things. And I suggest on the commentary today that if you type the words M2 money stock, and we even give you a link that you can follow there, you will find very quickly that that will give you a graph, which we've already made available on the website if you'd like to see it, of the increase in the money supply. And that should shock you. And if you've been listening to Point of View, you've heard me say this before. Because first of all, I point out that there has been an increase in the money supply ever since we had the crisis in 2008. And that has increased the direction of the money supply because of what was called quantitative easing. But now the thing that you will notice is since about March of last year, the amount of money just almost shoots straight up. The second thing you'll notice in the chart is it says discontinued. That's because there's so much money being printed. The Federal Reserve has given up trying to even give you a weekly update. They, I think, update it once a month, but by and large, that I think illustrates to me and should illustrate to you the fact that we're going to have to really begin to think very differently if we're going to be in a world of inflation. And we'll probably talk about that quite a bit. But when you have people still trying to deny that there's any kind of inflation, I give you a couple of facts and figures that help you understand that, yes, we've got a real issue, and it is certainly due in part to the fact that even the Consumer Price Index, which is my commentary tomorrow, really is basically a basket of goods, and certain things are in the basket and certain things are not in the basket, and because of that, it isn't, I think, as representative as it should be. So looking at today's commentary, looking at tomorrow's commentary may be enough for you to begin to realize that we're moving into kind of a different economic set of circumstances, and they are a reason for real concern. So, if you don't think we have a crisis in the Middle East, and you don't think we have a crisis with the issue of inflation and the monetary supply, let me talk about another crisis that seems to be in denial, and that is the crisis at our border. And I think this very good piece by Byron York was helpful because he takes on some of these issues. And so before we take a break, I want to talk about that. And then after the break, I thought we'd get into UFOs for just a minute, because after all, 60 Minutes is talking about this. Matt Walsh is talking about this. Tucker Carlson's talking about this. So we can talk about it here on Point of View. But let's get into this. Byron York puts it this way. Look, this disaster on the border right now, he says, is of the making from this president and this administration. He says the more we learn about the true intentions of the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, he says, the worse it is. He says now there's a new report out that the last few months authorities have encountered illegal border crossings, not just from Mexico and not just from the so-called Northern Triangle countries, but from 160 nations around the world. People are coming to Mexico from some of the most distant spots on the planet in order to cross illegally into the United States, confident that President Joe Biden will let them stay. And of course, that's exactly what's happening. He quotes, for example, one story from the New York Times. More than 12,500 individuals from Ecuador were encountered in March, up from 3,500 in January. Nearly 4,000 Brazilians, more than 3,500 Venezuelans, and those kinds of individuals as well. But then you have migrants that are coming from India and from Asia. Some reported taking buses in their hometowns to a bitty city like Mumbai, where then they board planes first to Dubai, then connect through Moscow, Paris, Madrid, then flying to Mexico City. From there, they are on a 2-day bus ride to reach the Mexico-U.S. border. And as a result, aid workers now say that they are finding migrants from every country, Arabic, Haitian Creole, Hindi, Portuguese speakers, and all the rest. Many are entering, he says, through the United States through the wide openings in the border wall near Yuma, Arizona, sparing them the risky routes through remote desert regions. There would be a border wall there if it weren't for the fact that there was an attempt to dismantle it. Now there's a talk, by the way, of the Biden administration maybe to at least close the gaps there. And so then Byron York asks the obvious question, why are they coming? Because they've heard correctly, he says, that the moment presents a huge opportunity to enter the United States illegally without fear of being sent home. They have a quote here from one individual who says, while most of the migrants do not necessarily understand the intricacies of U.S. border policy, many said in interviews that they received a limited time offer to enter the United States. Friends and family already in the country, along with smugglers eager to cash in, have assured them that they will not be turned away, and this is proving to be true. And so, if nothing else, Byron York comes to the end of this piece by saying the situation is absolutely and completely 100% Joe Biden's fault. Yes, it is what many Democrats wanted. It is what many activists and commentators wanted, for that matter. It is what the New York Times editorial board wanted. But the fact is, it would not happen without the President of the United States making it happen. The President could order border officials under his authority to enforce the law and turn away those who have no legal right to enter the United States other than at a port of entry. And then he makes a final comment, which I've used before. He says the President and the members of Congress and most Americans would never tolerate such a situation at the nation's airports or seaports when anyone flies into the United States from abroad, landing at, say, Atlanta, Hartsfield or Chicago O'Hare, LAX or whatever. The United States government demands that every single person present documents showing that they have a legal right to enter the country. Would anyone advocate scrapping that system and letting anyone and everyone enter with or without documents? Of course not. And I've used this illustration before when we've talked about immigration, when the numbers were such a level that I said, imagine that you had 10 airplanes. One lands in Chicago, one lands in New York, one lands in Los Angeles, one lands in Seattle, one lands in Kansas City, one lands in Dallas, one lands in Miami, one lands in Charlotte. And out of those airplanes are people that we don't know where they came from, we don't know why they're here, and we simply let them into our country. I mean, we would be horrified if that happened even with one airplane, and yet essentially that's what's happening at our border every single day. And to simply say, well, these are just individuals in Mexico that want a better life, people in El Salvador or Guatemala or Venezuela trying to escape any kind of persecution, that is not what is taking place. And if nothing else, I think this piece by Byron York is one of the best I've read. That's why we have posted it as our second article on the website. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let's see if we can talk about UFOs. We have two articles here just to let you know about some of the conversation taking place. The first one is kind of a transcript from 60 Minutes. The fact that 60 Minutes covered that on Sunday. The fact that there have been other people. Tucker Carlson covered it last night on his program. Matt Walsh has, and a variety of others. I thought it would be appropriate to address that issue as well. We've also posted a very good article by one of my my colleagues, Michael Gleghorn, who actually takes a good deal of this from a book that came out a number of years ago, kind of trying to give a Christian perspective on the issue of UFOs with the very engaging title, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. Now, we start with the obvious reality that a lot of things that have been called UFOs turn out to be IFOs. UFO, of course, stands for Unidentified Flying Object. IFO stands for, we've been able to identify what that was. And, you know, there are all sorts of explanations for it. Some of them have been hoaxes. Some of them have been hallucinations. Some have been misidentified, and we're dealing with all sorts of possibilities here. Planets, comets, military aircraft, rockets, and the rest. So you can very quickly identify maybe at least 95%, many people argue, and set those aside. Then you come to those that don't fit the natural, obvious explanation, which is exactly why 60 Minutes covered this. And the reason it's even coming out now is because you've had people like Senator Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, who has called for a detailed analysis by the Defense Department about the article we've posted here, and that is that some of these UFOs have been regularly spotted in restricted U.S. airspace. Now, if this is due to a foreign country that actually has some kind of advanced technology, we certainly need to know that. If this is evidence of something extraterrestrial, you'd really want to know that. And then, of course, as we point out in this article, Lights in the Sky, Little Green Men, it could be also interdimensional, and that would suggest that it's not from this physical world. And so you can see where that might lead to. Matter of fact, in this article, we also point out that there's been kind of an interesting occult connection, because some of those sightings, not necessarily the military base, but some of the others tie into that. But let's first of all get to what 60 Minutes covered. This is the piece by Bill Whitaker, who simply said that we have tackled many strange stories on 60 Minutes, but perhaps none like this. It's the story of the U.S. government's grudging acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomenon, oftentimes known as UFOs, although they call them UAPs. After decades of public denial, the Pentagon now admits there's something out there, and the U.S. Senate wants to know what it is. The Intelligence Committee has ordered the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense to deliver a report on the mysterious sightings by next month. So again, he asked one of those individuals, so what you're telling me is that UFOs, unidentified flying objects, are real? And the response is, Bill, I think we're already beyond that. The government has already stated for the record that they're real. I'm not telling you that. The federal government, the United States government, is telling you that. And so, interestingly enough, buried in the Pentagon budget was a $22 million program, which back then was sponsored by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to investigate this phenomenon of what we call UFOs. And as I've pointed out before, they give it a slightly different name there as well. But whatever you want to call them, whether it's UAPs or UFOs, it's basically the same thing. The problem is we are identifying some of these objects, which, again, this is a quote from 60 Minutes. Imagine a technology that can do 6 G-forces or 700 G-forces, that can fly at 13,000 miles an hour, that can evade radar, and that can fly through air and water and possibly space. And oh, by the way, there's no obvious signs of propulsion, no wings, no control surfaces, yet still can defy the natural effects of Earth's gravity. That's what we're seeing. So then, if you've watched the 60 Minutes piece, you can get all sorts of various interviews that were done. Another one that they did with Ryan Graves, who's a Navy pilot, a lieutenant. Bill Whitaker says, so you're seeing it both with the radar and with infrared, and that tells you there's something out there. And Ryan Graves says, it's pretty hard to spoof that. And so then they're asking, well, okay, when have you seen that? This is the really striking response. The Navy lieutenant, who's now a former Navy pilot, said, every day. What? every day for at least a couple of years. And Bill Whitaker said, wait a minute, every day for a couple of years? Yes. And so you begin to see this has been going on for some time, and we're only hearing about it. And part of that, if you want to know the history, is that there was what was called the Blue Book investigation. Took back in the 1960s, and I'm old enough to remember that, but some of you in the younger audience don't know. I mean, this is maybe something of science fiction, but back then the government looked into some of these UFOs. And by the way, as I point out, and even in our article, Little Green Men and Lights in the Sky, we point out that a lot of these can and had natural explanations of some sort or another. And that was what was called Project Blue Book, and it ended its investigation in 1969. And the argument was that there was really nothing there. But then that began to change by an incident in Southern California in 2004, in which you had these documented by radar, by camera, by 4 naval aviators, and you can see some of the interviews there on 60 Minutes, that actually began to not only observe them from a distance, but observe them pretty much close up. And so, again, this is some of the difficulty that these individuals are having trying to make sense of it, because they say you have rotation, you have high altitudes, you have propulsion, but there doesn't seem to be anything there. So again, the question is, if this is some kind of technology, Russian technology, Chinese technology, first of all, we still need to know about this, because guess what? It's oftentimes taking place in restricted U.S. airspace. And if it's something else, we need to know about it as well. So if you've wondered, how do I think about all of this? I think this last article that we've posted, put together by Michael Gleghorn, and really it's just kind of a brief but much more interesting and quick summary of some of the material that appeared in the book Lights in the Sky, Little Green Men, came out with Nav Press a number of years ago, plus a number of other quotes, facts, figures, and statistics to think about. But I did want to acknowledge that it is something that is being covered in the news. And as I've said on Point of View so many times before, everything's on the table, even something like UFOs. And the last point I might make is that a lot of this investigation is happening simply because of Senator Marco Rubio. And he's even pointed out that sometimes he's called for a detailed analysis. And whenever he would talk about that, people would kind of roll their eyes. They'd giggle a little bit. But nevertheless, the 60 Minutes piece ends with Marco Rubio saying, we're going to find out when we get that report from the Pentagon. You know, there's a stigma on Capitol Hill. I mean, some of my colleagues are very interested in this topic, and some kind of, giggle when we bring it up. But I don't think we can allow the stigma to keep us from having an answer to a very fundamental question. And that is what? He says, I want us to take it seriously, have a process to take it seriously. I want us to have a process to analyze the data every time it comes in. And so there would be a place where we can do some of the analysis. So this is something being required by the United States Senate, led by Senator Marco Rubio. And it surfaced on Sunday in 60 Minutes, and it surfaced in a lot of various talk shows. So I thought we'd talk about it today here on Point of View. If you find yourself saying, okay, I want to read some of these articles, that's why we posted them on the website. They're there for you to read. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating